Hello friends, welcome back. On my last story, I was talking about my adventure in the Bugaboos in British Columbia, putting up a new route, having the most epic climb of my life, barely surviving, but glad that I did, and it was a very satisfying experience. And it was time for the adventure to continue. So on this video, I'm going to talk about my time at the South Pole Station in Antarctica with Nicole. So Nicole and I had found this amazing opportunity. We just randomly went to this job fair here in the Denver area, found out that there was work that they did and all over Antarctica. And, as she and I had gone in, we had both gotten these amazing opportunities to work at the exclusive South Pole Station. Now, I didn't know anything about what was what down there. I didn't know that there was a difference between the South Pole itself versus anywhere else in Antarctica or whatever. But as it turned out that we found out later, working at the South Pole itself was like a very unique opportunity. Usually people have to work a few seasons to be able to get that opportunity because, I don't know, I guess it's like a little colder. But for whatever reason, she and I both found bosses that really liked us. So we were pretty psyched to get the opportunity, and I was going to get to build this telescope down there, and she was going to get to work on the kitchen and support staff at the South Pole, at the station itself. So Nicole was going to have to head down there first, kind of like she had done at Devil's Tower. Her services were needed a few weeks before me, so she kind of blazed the trail, and it was quite the adventure getting all the way down there. There was I think 7 or 8 connecting flights to get from Duluth all the way to the South Pole Station itself. So she took off. Now she got kind of held up a little bit on the way, both in Christchurch, New Zealand, and then also at the coast and the McMurdo Station. They have to wait for the temps to warm up enough so that the plane doesn't freeze in its landing. She flew down there. Eventually the temps finally warmed up above 50 below, and they were able to get her unloaded. Eventually I was able to join her. I got held up in New Zealand for a little bit, just waiting for the temperatures as well. Christchurch, New Zealand is kind of like the main headquarters where we get all of our extreme cold weather gear issued, and we meet our team and kind of get all set up for it. And then we boarded a C-17 military cargo plane and had quite the plane ride over the open ocean to the Antarctic continent, and then landed on the frozen ocean at the McMurdo Sound. And that was kind of an interesting experience. It was still totally locked up into winter mode. Stayed there in McMurdo for a little bit and kind of had to wait for a weather window where it would warm up enough for us to board the LC-130 and land there as well. And for whatever reason, I decided to be a punk and not care about extreme cold weather gear when we boarded the last plane to go to the South Pole itself. I guess in my mind, I was like, well, whatever, I'm from northern Minnesota, I can handle 50 below, no big deal. So I was like the only one wearing jeans and a jacket. My boss was not impressed with my stunt when I arrived there, and I got quite the reprimand. And honestly, it's lucky that he didn't just send me home, because he had sent another guy home, I guess, for something else that was kind of similar. Landing at the polar plateau was quite the experience. It's a crazy place to land. I mean, you feel like you're just on this open ocean of nothing. There's like the station, and then a few telescopes and pieces of equipment and some buildings, and then just nothing for hundreds of miles in all directions. So it was quite a wild place to land. As soon as I landed, I recognized Nicole. She was all completely covered head to toe, but I could recognize that it was her. And she showed me around. She'd been getting kind of a lay of the land, and had found this room for us. It was a 2-person room in the James Way, which was really unique. Everyone else, of course, has a 1-person room. I think Nicole and I were one of only 2 couples that were down there, so it was a lot of fun being with my wife down there. And we were staying in this little James Way, which is basically like an insulated tent. It felt like we were outdoor camping at the South Pole. It was pretty wild. There's like a frozen floor with snow on it. There's no bathroom there. You have to walk across to this other building. You have to get all bundled up just to go to the bathroom. We got 1 shower a week, and it was like a 2-minute shower, something like that. Of course, it's a lot of energy for them to bring in all the fuel to melt the snow so that we can have hot water. And then from the James Way, we would have to walk to the South Pole Station for our meals. This is where Nicole was going to work as well. So she got in with this really cool staff of world-class chefs, and it was quite the experience for her. And I was really happy that her job was going to have her working indoors primarily. But of course, all our recreating and living and stuff like that was going to be outdoors. So we, all of us had to completely get accustomed to life in the sub-zero temperatures. It towards the middle of the summer, it got up to, I think, just around 0 Fahrenheit, but otherwise it was down in the 20s and 40s below zero, and then in the 80s or 90s below with the wind chill or whatever. So the famous kind of slogan for Antarctica is it's the highest, driest, windiest, coldest, and most remote place on Earth. And we got to experience all those things. The other fascinating thing about being at the South Pole is the sun just does like a circle above your head, and then throughout the season it just kind of gets lower and lower, and then eventually you have this like 2-week long sunset. We weren't there for the sunset portion, of course. We were there as the sun was up. Nicole and I both got to work on the night shift, which is kind of arbitrary. We were on the New Zealand time zone, but what it meant is that we got to be working and sort of living while everyone else was asleep. So it was even more exclusive for us. Like, she was working the night shift on the kitchen crew, and I was working on the ironworking crew building this telescope. And and we were basically the only 2 crews that were awake all the time. So it felt even more like we were just the only ones in this just wild remote place. So it was really awesome. So I'll tell you a little about the work I was doing down there. I was going to be the climber / rigger for this big telescope that was being built by the University of Chicago. They had a bunch of scientists down there, and I was kind of doing the ironworking. Specifically, my job was going to be putting in all the bolts and kind of climbing into all the awkward, weird places where we would have to put the bolts to bolt this big machine together. There was like 10,000 pounds worth of bolts or something like that. So I'd have this like hydraulic torque wrench and climb up there with all this stuff and install them and torque them. There was like 4 or 5 other people on the ironworking team with me. I got to learn a lot of interesting skills, just steel fabrication and tap and die and welding, and got to use a lot of my climbing skills too, and it actually came in really handy. And it was a blast climbing on this huge steel structure. It was I think 80 feet tall with this 10-meter off-axis dish. It was just totally interesting. And the steel was like really cold, of course. I mean, if you ever touched your bare skin to the steel, you'd get this burn. So it was really crazy. They had these special boots called bunny boots for us to walk around, and these special mittens. But of course, you're always just fighting the cold. I mean, when it's that cold, just working outdoors for these 10-hour shifts, I mean, I was just constantly like trying to get the blood into my fingertips and stuff like that. But honestly, it didn't feel that much worse than working in northern Minnesota. In some ways, it even felt nicer, because I feel like in Minnesota, there's like this frozen moisture in the air constantly, whereas in Antarctica, it's just so dry. It's like you're just in this desert, so it makes it feel not quite as bad. Plus, the sun was always out; it was always shining, basically. So it was actually pretty pleasant. So we also kind of did a lot of partying down there. I mean, all these guys really knew how to party. Like, we worked 6 days a week, and then on our day off, I mean, we'd pull into the Saturday morning safety meeting and we just start drinking beers, and it was just a lot of debauchery and drinking and partying, especially on New Year's and Christmas and Thanksgiving. They had these huge celebrations with 2 days off. I remember we kind of had like a little rock concert once where I got to play the drums, and there was a bunch of other people playing like guitars and singing and stuff, some of the other scientists. And we'd do other things like play Scrabble, or we had this the South Pole International Film Festival where we all had made our own little like independent films. And it was also interesting being at the South Pole itself, because apparently Nicole's great uncle or something like that is Roald Amundsen. So we were there on the 95th anniversary of his discovering the South Pole. Nicole and I got to meet a lot of interesting people, interesting scientists. We got to tour the Ice Cube facility, which is this neutrino observatory, and they take these super deep, like over 1,000 feet deep ice core samples, and they just drill way down into the ice and study neutrinos. It was kind of an interesting experiment that they're doing. And we also got to team up with the weather team and do this trek where we hopped in a snowcat with these climatologists and went way off the edge of the horizon, basically to the middle of nowhere, and just got to take in the broad expanse of the nothingness that is everywhere that you can see. But they were just like measuring snow depth levels or something like that. But it is a fascinating and weird place to be to take in. So the telescope project pretty much went on schedule. It went pretty smoothly, and towards the end of it, as we were putting the big dish together and installing that, they had National Geographic out there and kind of do this like documentary and filmed us putting, the big moment of installing the dish, and that was kind of like a big deal for all of them. So one day I decided to have a little adventure. I'd just been working down there, and I had seen all these skiers coming in from like the coast, coming for hundreds of miles. I can only imagine what it would be like for an adventurer to decide to go to the South Pole of the world and to spend all these days and weeks, and if not months, trekking across the open Antarctic plateau just to arrive at the South Pole itself and see all these buildings and just drunk partying kids everywhere and tractors and cranes and the station, and it must be a very weird experience. But I was kind of feeling the urge, like I wanted to go on like my own little adventure or something. So I grabbed some cross-country skis and decided to just disappear off the edge of the horizon. I didn't bring any communication equipment or anything with me, but I just wanted to go off by myself one day, and I did have a little adventure out there. The station itself kind of was this tiny little blip on the horizon, and then this interesting weather phenomenon happened, which is kind of a famous thing on the Antarctic plateau, where you can actually get into a whiteout without it snowing or having anything going on. And what happens is you get this flat light, and it's actually a lot scarier than it sounds. Like, in my mind, is that even as I'm describing it, I'm like, well, whatever, you can always tell that there's something out there. But no, in this phenomenon, like the sky and the snow develop the same color. And the only thing that I can compare it to is like that scene in The Matrix where he goes to this like white blank loading screen. Like that's what it looked like. It was like I was on this blank white loading screen with nothing. And when that condition came in, I couldn't see the station anymore. I literally had no way of knowing where to go. Of course, a compass doesn't work down there. So now I did have something. I had this little blip on the horizon kind of off to my right. So I just sort of focused on that little blip of light on the horizon and just started going. But it was weird. Like you couldn't see the undulations in the snow. Like all of a sudden you'd kind of go down it's called sastrugi, like all these little waves in the snow basically. But I wouldn't be able to see anything. I would just like smash into a snowbank, and I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between that and the sky. It was weird. So I just went for like hours like that, keeping this little blip on the horizon, just like hoping that I could find my way back to the station. And eventually I saw this flag, and I was able to kind of track that, and this was like one of the last flags for the skiway, which eventually led me all the way back to the main crossroad where the stations were. So I was able to come back, but apparently I had been off by like 90 degrees. I was way off course. So after about 5 months of being there, our projects were coming to a close, and they started flying people out of there. So sometime I think in April, and Nicole and I got our ticket and headed out of there back to McMurdo. And it was crazy because when we left, like it was back into the the 50s below again, and our bodies had become quite adapted to that kind of temperature. But I remember like flying back into the McMurdo Sound and landing on the ocean again, and it was like 20 degrees, and just how warm that felt. It was weird. We were totally bummed out. We didn't get to see any penguins or seals or anything like that. If we had been at the McMurdo station during the where the sound melts out and stuff like that, you can see all the wildlife, and I'm hoping to be able to take my family down there sometime. Maybe we can all get contracts working down there. But I want to work at the McMurdo station so I can see, the wildlife. There's also interesting volcanoes and mountains and topography and rock. There's more to see other than just flat snow at the McMurdo station. So next time. But anyways, Nicole and I flew back, kind of reversed our track. We spent a few days in New Zealand, and we were trying to figure out what to do next in our life. We'd both been kind of thinking and pondering. We were making all this money that we weren't able to spend anywhere down there. We had both kind of randomly had the idea of going to Israel for some reason, but we hadn't talked about it with each other. And as we were flying back, I kind of mentioned it to her. I'm like, hey, I don't know, but for some reason, I've been feeling like for months that I'm supposed to go to Israel, and I knew nothing about it, like literally nothing. And I don't think she really did either, maybe a little more than me. But apparently she had been feeling the same way, just like it was like God had put this on our hearts for some reason, and we didn't really know what to do with that. So we figured, hey, let's just go down there and see what happens. So of course, we'd find out later that this is kind of a ridiculous concept. Like, you're supposed to have at least a visa or a return trip ticket, which we didn't get. But I'll get to all that stuff on the next video, so we'll pick it up there next time. Thanks.